Machiavelli hat einmal den Satz geprägt, das beste Mittel, Informationen zu erhalten, ist es, Informationen zu geben. Und damit hat er unbewusst vor mehr als 500 Jahren im Grunde das Leitmotiv von Open Data auch formuliert. Die Erkenntnis, dass Wissen wächst, wenn man es teilt. Open Data meint ja in der Sache, Datenbestände offen zugänglich zu machen, in einem offenen Format, um damit den Nutzen zu erzeugen, der in den Daten steckt. Eine wichtige Schubwirkung hat diesem Gedanken im Jahr 2009 Obama verliehen mit einem Memorandum on Transparency and Open Government. Und seither ist diese Forderung, die Datenbestände offen zu legen, auch nicht mehr verstummt. Die Verfechter wollen diesen Datenschatz nutzen, um Teilhabe zu ermöglichen, um staatliches Handeln transparenter zu machen und auch Daten als Innovationstreiber einsetzen zu können. Und dieser Open-Data-Gedanke ist letztlich Ausdruck eines größeren Konzepts der Open-Bewegung, die Open Access beinhaltet, den freien Zugang von wissenschaftlichen Daten, zu der auch gehört Open Source, also offene Quellcodes statt proprietäre Software und eben Open Government, offenes Verwaltungshandeln. Und all diese Konzepte eint letztlich der Grundgedanke, Lizenzbedingungen zu schaffen, die geistiges Eigentum frei zugänglich machen, damit auf dieser Grundlage dann Werte entstehen können. Und die Open-Data-Kultur ist eine, die sehr mit Argusaugen auch darüber wacht, dass das geschieht, trifft dabei auf eine Verwaltungskultur, die völlig anders geprägt ist, jedenfalls in Deutschland. In Deutschland lebt die Verwaltung den Gedanken der Arkan-Tradition, des Amtsgeheimnisses. Deutsche Beamte sind von dem Gedanken beseelt, den Seneca mal ausgedrückt hat. Du wirst niemanden finden, der bei offener Tür leben möchte, hat er formuliert. Oder man könnte es salopp ausdrücken, wer nach allen Seiten offen ist, der ist nicht ganz dicht. Und diese zurückhaltende Verwaltungspraxis, die trifft auf eine Gesetzgebung, die versucht der Verwaltung, die ja auf diesen Datenschätzen sitzt, etwas Druck und Bein auszuüben. Die Informationsfreiheitsgesetze waren der erste Schritt in diese Richtung. Jeder kann von der Verwaltung auf Antrag Informationen über die Bestände der Verwaltung erlangen, sei es, was auf der Speisekarte des G7-Gipfels stand, sei es auch die Frage, ob der Bundestag ein Gutachten zu außerirdischem Leben mal erstellt hat, war eine Informationsanfrage. Nur Open Data ist das jetzt noch nicht. Für Unternehmen wird es erst dann interessant, wenn maschinenlesbar antragslos Daten zur Verfügung stehen. Und die Länder Rheinland-Pfalz und Hamburg haben mit ihren Transparenzgesetzen diesen Weg beschritten und verpflichten die Verwaltung darauf, maschinenlesbar Daten vorzuhalten. Auf Bundesebene kennen wir inzwischen auch ein Portal, das diese Verwaltungsdaten für alle zugänglich machen soll, für alle Ebenen, Kommunen, Länder und Bund. Das Portal GovData, gleichsam eine Art Marktplatz für Daten. Insbesondere Geodaten sind dort ausgesprochen interessant, um Windkraftanlagen planen zu können oder um etwa eine App zu Wetterdaten aufbauen zu können. Immerhin, so sagt man, 80% unserer Entscheidungen sollen einen Raumbezug haben. Deutschland ist auch Teil der UGP-Initiative geworden, der Open Government Partnership, der 75 Länder angehören mit dem Ziel, das Verwaltungshandeln transparenter zu machen. Aber Deutschland möchte noch weitergehen. Die Große Koalition hat ihren Vertrag ausgelobt, das Ziel, wir wollen internationaler Vorreiter im Open Government werden. Da heißt es im Johannesevangelium, an ihren Taten sollt ihr sie erkennen und wir wollen eine Bestandsaufnahme vornehmen. Wo steht Deutschland und wo sollte Deutschland hin, um Open Government erreichen zu können? Und dank der Organisation unserer Sprecherinnen können wir auf ein sehr kompetentes Dreigestirn zurückgreifen, die mit Erfahrungen aus Großbritannien und den Niederlanden sich einbringen. Begrüßen Sie mit mir Frau Taylor vom Tilburg Institute for Law, Society and Technology, Herrn Gardotti vom Imperial College und Herrn Wells vom Open Data Institute. Und ich schlage vor, dass wir mit Ihnen, Herr Wells, beginnen. Herr Wells ist Head of Policy am Open Data Institute. Und das ist ein Unternehmen, gemeinnützig strukturiert, das versucht, mithilfe von vertrauenswürdigen Datenökosystemen gemeinwohlorientierte Entscheidungen herbeizuführen. Und Herr Wells kann darüber sehr gut Auskunft geben, wie ein solches Modell denn ausschauen könnte. Herr Belt hat eigens seinen Urlaub in Schottland für uns unterbrochen. Und umso größeren Dank verdient es, dass Sie bereit sind, uns etwas in den Gedanken von Open Data einzuführen. Wir sind gespannt auf Ihre Ausführungen.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me speak in English as well. I apologise, my German is very bad. So Mario discussed who the Open Data Institute are. Just for people who don't know, we're a not-for-profit, we're international, we're independent, we're funded by various organisations, government, philanthropics and businesses. We're 7 years old, founded by Sir Nigel Shadbolt and Sir Tim Berners-Lee, based in London but working globally. Although I'm not based in London, I'm often based in Scotland or Newcastle. And our mission, so when we talk about ethics, it's often important to understand what people are trying to achieve, what kind of vision of the future is right for them. No, we're trying to build a world where data works for everyone. So that's the mission, that's what we want to achieve. We know that's a very long-term goal because we literally do mean everyone. So this is a 100, 200-year task type thing. I will not be there for it. And the way we approach that is primarily we work with companies and governments to build an open, trustworthy data ecosystem. So there's other organisations who are part of the open government movement or the open movement as a whole. There's Open Knowledge Word down there. So Open Knowledge Foundation, the Web Foundation, similar organisations working with a similar goal to us, trying to build a similar world, but tackling different parts of the ecosystem to build that future. I thought it was useful at first just to talk a bit about how we get value from data. So if we're trying to build a world where data works for everyone, well, we think about quite a simplified form of the data supply chain or the data value chain. There's data which is held by organisations who steward it. That data is then made available to organisations who create products or services or projects to find insights from that data. And then there's people who make decisions based on what they find from that data. It's only when people make decisions, or actually make decisions or don't make decisions, decide not to, that we actually get any value from the data. The rest of it is just potential. What we're trying to do is build a world where many, by making the data as open as possible, many different people and organisations can make those decisions and help them make those decisions and build that future. So to give a practical example, one of the classic open data ones is transport and transport decision making. So when we make transport data more accessible and more open so more people can use it and build into a range of products and services, I as a citizen get recommended routes that are customised for my needs or where I want to get to, or customised for particular mobility options I might prefer to ride by bicycle or go by bus. There's public transport planners can use the data to make decisions. There's private organisations looking for where to put their options. And there's campaigners as well can start to make decisions about where new routes should go or what's going wrong or what's going right. And at the ODI, we think about three futures for our data. So we've got this basic thing, we can create data in that way, but we think about three potential futures we're heading towards. One is the data hoarding future, or the world where data is treated like oil and where people try to hoard it, and they're told it's a precious asset which only they must have. And what you find then is very vertical use. Only a single organisation often can use the data. There's narrow decision-making needs, reflecting on what data is collected and extracted. There's a very restricted market of services that can be built from that data. And data is often extracted because those decision makers are saying, I need to get the data, and I'm going to get it from those citizens or from this business or from this part of the city, come what may. And we tend to think this is the future we're currently heading towards on the current path without more significant changes in our regulatory environments. There's a future that's on alternative as well, where we could head to if citizens and consumers react more strongly. The data fearing future, where too much harm is caused by data. Initiatives like OpenShoe highlight some of the bad uses being done by data or some of the lack of clarity, and people respond to that by not providing data to businesses, by providing false data. And I suppose, someone in the room, when you sign up for a Wi-Fi network, do you really give your real name or do you give a fake name? Just saying they don't need to know who I actually am. I'm going to type in some fake data. In the data fearing future, we get more and more of that. We get people withdrawing consent, and we get poor conclusions from the data. It restricts the social and economic value we can get from data. And the ODI, what we're trying to do is trying to find a good balance between the data hoarding and the data fearing. We know we can't predict all the consequences of our interventions. The balance is, it will vary by geography. It's going to vary by culture and by society what balance they choose between hoarding data up and getting into some scary places. We need some constant monitoring and nudging to work out how we get between those things. A lot of the work we do to try to find that balance is through practical tools. So there's a conversation earlier about turning principles into practice. So for data ethics, for example, when we looked at the data ethics issues a couple of years ago, we found that most people didn't know what questions to ask. And we found lots of teams who were building new products who wanted to build better products, but they didn't know what questions to ask to understand the ethical and potential ethical issues and the decisions they needed to make. So we just built a tool for them. This is actually the new version, which will go live next week, I think. I've got a few copies of the old version here, the canvas. And we just say, here is how you can build that into your processes and start to surface those ethical decisions at the project level. But part of this as well, so just want to touch on two things. Firstly, data as infrastructure and the public sector's role in that, and then the private sector's role in that. So we think of the way we conceptualise it, and the way many economists are actually coming around to think of it as well, is that data is an emerging form of infrastructure. It's a virtual infrastructure or an intangible infrastructure. It's not something we can see and touch in quite the same way, but it's as important to our societies and our economies as many other forms of infrastructure. Now, we use the example of roads. It's how we often look at the parallels. Roads help us get to a location. Data helps us make a decision. And because it's infrastructure, that means we need to take quite strategic decisions, because the decisions we make about infrastructure last a long time. I used to work in Cologne, where Bjorn is at the university there. There's a wonderful Roman museum in Cologne, which has a map of, I can't remember the name of it, but the map of the Roman publicus cursus, the old Roman roads across Europe. And one of the fantastic things about that map is seeing how the towns are still in the same places. So where the towns were built 2,000, 3,000 years ago, they were built for the Roman Empire, for their economy, for their military conquest. They're still in the same places, in many, many places. The roads are still there, we just go alongside them. Similarly with data, the decisions we make have quite long-term consequences, like any form of infrastructure. And in that infrastructure, it's not just the data that's the infrastructure. So we talk about data infrastructure, digital infrastructure, technical infrastructure. So we think of the data assets as being part of that infrastructure, just like the roads and our transport networks. The data standards and technologies that are used to make the data. The data policies and guidance, the rules of the road, how we can use data. The data stewards, the organisations are actually part of our infrastructure in the same way that the organisations that decide where German roads will be built and planned, they're part of your road infrastructure. And then the stakeholders, everyone who uses that data, the drivers, gas station operators. So again, it's, I suppose, going back to some of the early comments, it's a socio-technical system to use those systems when we look at that infrastructure. And we have to think of it through that little web of networks of these interrelationship of these different components. And some of the important questions around this data infrastructure are who builds it? And when you actually look at our data infrastructure, although the open data movement started off with governments, much of the data infrastructure, much of the data we need to solve citizens' problems, to make our societies better places, is built by the public, the private and the third sectors. They're all building those things, whether it be for the delivery in public services, but also for private services. That's part of our data infrastructure. These, they build it, they get access to it. Then you have the question of who controls access to that data. Now, the value of the data is unlocked through its use, so the access needs to take into account this the range of actors who want access to the data to make decisions to improve people's lives, because that's what we're trying to do this for. So just one more, I suppose, analogy on there as well. So when you think of the data infrastructure, you think about road networks or private roads. So the roads to our, if we're lucky enough to live in a house which has its own road going to it, there's a private drive to that house maybe. There's gated communities and military bases. There's toll roads in some cases in some countries where you have to pay to use that road to get to a location. And there's public roads that anyone can use. Similarly, data infrastructure has that mix of different things. And we visualize that as the data spectrum from closed data to shared to open. say these are the different types of data and different organisations and people who can access it. It's a whole range of different possibilities there, and a lot of the challenges for, not necessarily for the Ethics Commission, but for the framework the Ethics Commission sets out is where to place data on this spectrum to meet the needs of the German population. So moving slightly on from there towards some of the sweet spots, some where you can get the most value. So we see 3 sweet spots, which are the market itself isn't solving in some of these things. So one is open APIs. So data about individual people and organisations that those people and organisations can control, access and use, and they can allow third parties to access. So this is, in the language of GDPR, it's data access and data portability. But there's other ways of implementing that. It does not necessarily need GDPR to implement those APIs. There's secure access to data, which is about many, many people. So the kind of secure access that could be used to do a research lab to look at a medical condition or to look at the impact of social media networks. And then there's open data, kind of the foundational layers. If you look at a road network, the highways of our road network, things like geospatial data, environmental data, lists of business IDs, lists of public sector organisations, these foundational data sets that need to be open so we can build many more things on top of them. But so I wanted just to touch on the role the private sector should play in our data infrastructure, because often we focus on government and we say government must open up its data, but the private sector holds all this data too. And we do need to talk about that and work out what the rules of the road there should be. So it's quite important to get access to private sector data because of you can have pre-competitive situations. So, for example, if you were building an intelligent mobility system within Germany, you could get parts of the market to share data with each other, which they can collaborate on to create an environment where those new services can emerge. Or we've been working with pharmaceutical companies to share data about trials of antimicrobial resistance and the drugs that could be used to tackle those issues. And pharmaceutical companies are willing to share it if other organisations are willing to share it with them too. And they start to do that as a set of collaboration. Now, innovation, by increasing access to the data held by private sector firms, we can increase innovation and competition. We can start to create those fair markets. The statistics and research. So national statisticians looking for ways to measure the economy, to understand public services. They're looking for access to private sector data. And then data philanthropy. So providing data for public good purposes like satellite imagery or to look at humanitarian aid. But often the question then goes, so if we can increase access to private sector data and get some of those benefits, why would businesses get involved? And in our experience, we found multiple reasons that the private sector will share access and increase access to data, both shared and open data. So sometimes they want to increase access to data because they want to become one of those platforms. One of the characteristics of the platform businesses like Google, like Amazon, like Uber, like Airbnb, is often they're sharing some of the data that they hold. That's part of their economy. That's part of their business model, so you can use that argument with businesses. Some businesses just want to be the good guy. So they do want to use data as a corporate social responsibility to say, I've increased access to some data, please stop bashing me about something else. It is an argument, it does work sometimes, not for long though, typically. For those new business models, so the image there is from an initiative we run in England called Open Active, where we've had leisure centres and sports facilities around England providing public open data about all of the courses and activities you can do at those leisure centres. They do it because they get more customers. People can discover what activities are available to the leisure centre and we can build services around that. Reduce costs. Just on Tuesday, we announced a new initiative with the Lloyd's Register Foundation getting engineering firms to increase access to safety data. It's about engineering and physical infrastructure so they can be made safer, and that reduces the cost for those businesses. Or new products can be launched like those like the platform models. You can legislate for access to data from the private sector, whether it be through initiatives like the PSI, which with the revamp now includes some of the private sector data, which is providing public services. The Digital Republic Act in France, In the UK, the Digital Economy Act, which allows national statisticians to get access to data held by the private sector. There's no cost involved to the public sector in that. They've said we have a right to access that data. Public sector procurement, so the work Francesca talked about in Barcelona, but the work the EU again is pushing now to say we should use public sector procurement to increase access to data held by the private sector so we get those benefits. Regulatory action, so the open banking movement, which is now in 12 countries and counting, which built off the European Union's Payment Services Directive initiative, and the UK took it a step further. So we encourage banks in the UK to open up data about their branch locations, their cash machines, the cost for using a cash machine, but also increase open APIs around bank statements. And other countries are now following that similar model. And you'll find both in the UK and the EC, the report for the independent report from Margaret Vestager, recent competition policy, was proposing more regulators should have similar powers. But how can you do that? It's a bit, so you can say we can do it, there's reasons why we should do it, and there's ways to make businesses do it, either by choice or in some cases through a stick. But sometimes we use a nice carrot as well as a stick. We're doing some research at the moment. Apologies, this map is it's Sharpies on a whiteboard with post-it notes. We have a designer turning it into a professional map fairly soon. We've been trying to look at the different governance models around data access, ranging from open data, which is top left on this picture, and down to closed and no access down at the bottom right, with pirates getting in. But a whole range of access models that can be used and are appropriate in different contexts based on the problem that you're trying to solve. To sure, it would be about trying to solve a problem. And what we've been doing at the ODI recently is actually been diving into each of these data governance models and starting to say, can we create guides as to when to use it, and when you use it, how to do it. So, for example, just actually about 3 weeks ago, the reason why I've gone on holiday for a long time is because of this piece of work, which took quite a lot out of me. Looking at data trusts, so a model which has independent institutions with trustees with legally binding responsibilities to make decisions about data in line with a particular purpose, and a legal structure which controls them in there. So it allows new institutional ways to increase access to data. And you can look at these things again within a German context. How would these work? What are the models that might work in different places? And we try to explain these things using pretty pictures because we're the ODI and we do like colourful pictures. It's one of our things. But there's a range of institutions, so data marketplaces for brokerage between organisations, data cooperatives where individuals contribute data for member benefit, or people-led data trusts where individuals, I suppose Open Schufa is something that might have been a people-led data trust if it was easier to do. Individuals contributing data for a particular purpose. So this range of models needs to be investigated and explored using practical experiments. The way we did our work, we didn't just do the paper, we didn't just do the theory, we tried to build the things in 3 different contexts and use that to develop the learnings to share the methodologies. We need to accomplish the data governance with supporting technologies, so work around the web, so I suppose linking back to the technical panel earlier. Work around the web, how to publish data with APIs so it's discoverable. Privacy advancing technologies like synthetic data and differential privacy, homomorphic encryption that Francesca mentioned. There's some cases where you need to protect that data using different techniques. And decentralized and federated storage. So I suppose as the ODI we would recommend against building centralized data pools and data lakes and those kind of initiatives. Try to decentralize and federate the data. It's more flexible, but it protects against certain risks around the data being either hacked by somebody or by being controlled, whether it be hacked from the outside or controlled by a single governance mechanism. You spread the risk by decentralizing the data. But as we build that data infrastructure, I say you will see some familiar challenges. So the quality is in the eye of the beholder for data. There's no such thing as a single measure for data quality. What's good for me might be terrible for somebody else. So you need to look at different measures of data quality, discovery for data, how to standardize that data so you can get interoperability, countering concerns around risks and issues, sustainability, the funding model for the effort of sharing data, looking at the benefits, who benefits from the data, from the services built from the data, and from the decisions made using the services from the data. Very familiar challenge, a very hard one. Finding the right answer in a particular context needs work. And there's deeper challenges too, though. You know, if you're building on top of private sector data to build that data infrastructure, how do we make sure the data is not just available to the public sector, but available more broadly to businesses and communities or people holding government to accounts? How to build citizen trust in the use and storage of data. There's a risk of legitimising surveillance if we collect too much data from businesses that are collecting data for advertising, for example. And what does that mean for competition? And politics. Who answers these challenges? Who makes the decisions? How does that vary by geography and context? In Germany, you have quite a decentralised state compared to, say, the UK or France, with a strong Länder. So you have cities as well, which have their own things. Or Berlin is its own Länder as well. So what level should the decisions be made and in what context? And I won't summarise because I've run out of time. But data is infrastructure. Find a good balance.
Vielen Dank, Herr Wels. Vielen Dank für die Einführung in Open Data und die Rationalität, die dahinter steht. Open by Design beißt sich ja etwas mit Privacy by Design. Denn in den Daten, die verarbeitet werden, stecken personenbezogene Informationen oder Betriebsgeheimnisse, Geschäftsgeheimnisse. Wer von uns wäre bereit, sein Bewegungsprofil im öffentlichen Nahverkehr offen zu legen? Insofern hat die alte Hackerethik, die da lautet, use public data, protect private data, eine innere Spannungslage. Und wir wollen uns im folgenden Vortrag damit auseinandersetzen, wie sich diese Spannungslage auflösen lässt. Und der Aufgabe wird sich Herr Andrea Gadotti zuwenden. Er ist Doktorand im Bereich Computational Privacy am Imperial College in London. Wir beide haben etwas gemeinsam. Wir tragen beide einen italienischen Namen. In meinem Fall sind die Wurzeln eher im 18., 19. Jahrhundert. Seine sind sehr frisch. Er hat in Turin studiert, mathematische Logik hat er studiert und beschäftigt sich in seinen Forschungsschwerpunkten mit Fragen von Privatsphären, Schutzmechanismen und Datenfreigabesystemen. Also letztlich mit den Bremsklötzen für Open Data. Und wir wollen uns der Frage zuwenden, muss der Datenschutz ein Bremsklotz für Open Data sein oder sind es andere Gründe, die gleichsam die Handbremse lösen? Und wie lässt sich dieser Widerspruch zwischen Privacy und Open Data auflösen? Sie haben das Wort.
So yeah, I'm part of. At Imperial College, I'm doing a PhD at the Algorithmic Society group, but I'm also a member of the Computational Privacy group. And in that group, we study essentially how to use data while protecting the privacy of the individual in the era of big data. So today, the kind of data I'm going to talk about is big data, and specifically individual level data. So this means, for example, mobile data, search queries data, or credit card data. So the common property of this data is that for each individual, many data points are available. So this kind of data is incredibly useful. It has brought to a revolution in social science, and it has even led to the creation of an entirely new field of research, which is called computational social science. Now the question is, so we would like to use the data because the data is useful, but can we actually use the data in a privacy conscientious way? And what are the challenges of using individual level and sensitive data to this end? So in the presentation, I'll try to give at least a partial answer to this question. So to give a bit of the context first, I'll give you a couple of examples. So maybe some of you have heard about this. In 2017, Transport for London started a program in order to collect Wi-Fi signal from commuters in the London Underground in order to understand better the commuting patterns in the underground. And to respond to some criticism about the privacy of this program, they said that the information they collect is anonymous, and specifically that it is depersonalized so that no individuals could be identified. The city of Antwerp did a similar program to collect Wi-Fi signal in the city, so they installed some Wi-Fi sensors in order to understand how people move across the city. And again, also in this case, they said that we don't know whose mobile it is, the data is anonymous. On the other hand, since at least 15 years, researchers have shown many times that anonymous data is often not so anonymous as we might think. So for example, in 2006, AOL shared a big data set with search queries, and the researchers could actually re-identify some people in this data set. And in 2008, some researchers could re-identify people in a very large data set that Netflix released in the context of a challenge to improve their recommendation system. And also, research has shown that some re-identification attacks are possible on DNA data. So it looks like that here there are two hypotheses, right? So the first one is that anonymization, or also called de-identification, is actually a smart and contemporary response to the privacy challenges of big data, and that anonymization can be very useful when done fully and correctly. And this is the opinion of the Australian ICO. The other hypothesis, the alternative hypothesis, is that de-identification is actually an old technique that might have worked for, let's say, smaller dimensional data sets, like tabular data sets, but does not really scale to big data, which is the modern data, the cool data that we want to use now. And so we tried to set an experiment in order to understand which hypothesis is the correct one. So first, just to give you an idea of what is the kind of question we want to ask, in the 1930s, it was shown that a fingerprint, a human fingerprint, can be uniquely identified by only 12 points. So now we would like to ask how many points in a data set are necessary to uniquely identify a person that contributed their data to that data set. And in order to do this, we defined a metric, unicity, which measures precisely this. So it quantifies the average risk of re-identification of a data set, knowing P points. So first, okay, let's assume we have a mobile data set, and Scott contributed his data to this data set. So what this means is that we have a lot of data points about Scott, and each data point is a location and a time interval, which tells me where Scott was during that time interval. So for example, a data point might be that Scott was in Piccadilly Circus between 10 and 11 a.m. today. And of course, we have this kind of data for a lot of individuals. So how many such points do we need to re-identify Scott in the data set? And the answer is that with only 4 random points, 95% of the times, we can re-identify Scott uniquely in the data set. So this research was done using a data set for a European country which contains 1.5 million people over a period of 15 months. And so to emphasize this means that if I have 4 random points about an individual who is in the data set, then 95% of the times I can actually identify uniquely the trace of this person in the data set, and therefore look where that person has been throughout the 15 months in this case. Okay, so one might ask, where do we get these 4 points, this background knowledge to re-identify the target? And well, I mean, a lot of people already know where we live and where we work, and so that's already 2 points. And as for the other 2 points, well, let's say that often we are not very privacy aware about our location, so we often share it on social networks, for example, and not only. Okay, so very quickly, one of the methods used to anonymize the data, to help anonymizing the data usually, is to reduce the accuracy, the resolution of the data. So for example, we generalize some attributes to something that is a bit coarser. So in the case of mobility data, this would mean that maybe instead of having a data point every hour, I have a data point every 2 or 3 hours. And also from a spatial point of view, this would mean that instead of giving the exact location of the individual, I give a more general location. So instead of saying that the individual at this time was in Piccadilly Circus, I can say that he was in central London. So does this kind of generalization work to actually protect better the privacy of individuals? And so there is some good news here and bad news. The good news is that generalizing the data works, but on the other hand, first, it decreases dramatically the utility of the data, because the less precise the data is, of course, the less you can use it for. And second, which is for privacy like a big problem, the privacy that you gain by reducing the generality, the precision of the data, is actually destroyed completely by assuming that the attacker knows a couple more points. So in the end, you're not buying much by generalizing the data. And so these results led us to conclude that we have no reason to believe that an efficient enough yet general anonymization method will ever exist for high-dimensional data. And the US President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology reached a similar conclusion, saying that anonymization is somewhat useful as an added safeguard, but it is not robust against near-term future re-identification methods. And particularly, PCAST does not see it as being a useful basis for policy. Okay, so this sounds probably a bit sad and disappointing, because in the end we want to use the data, right? Like this is very important for social good, for innovation, for business. So is there a way to still use the data while protecting privacy? And we believe there is. And in order to get a better privacy utility trade-off, we think that the way forward is privacy-enhancing technologies, and particularly privacy through security. So without going into details, here there are different models to achieve this in order to do what we call privacy-preserving data publishing or analysis. One of these models is called question and answer model. And here, with question and answer systems, we move away from this anonymization release and forget model, where we take the data, we anonymize it, and then we release it, and the data is out, and we will never be able to get it back. To a model where actually the data is stored on a protected server, and analysts can send questions, queries about the data, and get aggregate results in return. So no individual level data, but only aggregate data, which is what is actually usually necessary for analysis. So this is what we are trying to do with Opal, which is a project we are currently working on with the MIT Media Lab, Orange, and other partners. So Opal is a query and answer system to release, to perform analysis on mobile data, and it's currently being piloted in Senegal and Colombia. And the project is entirely open source, and also the kind of techniques we use are published, as we think that transparency when it comes to security and privacy is absolutely fundamental. So when it comes to query and answer systems, there is a lot of research that shows that actually storing the data on a protected server helps privacy, but it still does not prevent completely a malicious analyst to actually try and re-identify the data. about a single individual. People are coming up with a lot of advanced methods to actually try and prevent this. Here, I just want to say that this is a hard problem and people are working on this. So, for example, a German startup recently released a mechanism that is supposed to make a data and a query and answer system privacy preserving. But in last year, we found a serious vulnerability in this system, which would allow a malicious analyst to infer a sensitive attribute of a person in the dataset with very high accuracy. So this is not to say that they did anything terribly wrong, just to say that this is actually a hard problem. And yes, if you are interested in knowing more about this, you can read our report, which is available at that address. Thank you.
Sehr geehrter Herr Gadotti, Sie haben uns sehr deutlich gemacht, dass das traditionelle Modell der Anonymisierung in Zeiten von Big Data so nicht mehr funktioniert, dass aber gleichwohl Open Data sich auch in diesen Zeiten noch realisieren lässt, ohne dass man den Bürger gläsern macht, weil es neue Methoden gibt. Bevor wir die damit aufgeworfenen Spannungslagen auch zwischen den Vorträgen diskutieren, wollen wir Frau Taylor das Wort geben. Sie ist Professorin am Tilburg-Institut und leitet das Open Data Justice Projekt, das der Europäische Forschungsrat finanziert. Dort beschäftigt sie sich mit der Frage, wie nehmen Bürger die wachsende Rolle von Daten wahr, wie gehen sie mit Risiken und Nutzen von Datentechnologien um und wie kann eine gute Governance solcher Strukturen aussehen. Und wir sind gespannt auf Ihre Ausführungen, Frau Taylor.
I should switch that on. Thank you very much. Well, thanks for the two excellent presentations. I'm going to try and draw these sets of information together around an idea of how we might want to look for the public good and where we might want to look for it. So, does this work? Oh, yes, it does. There are two notions of the public good in play in the conversations that we've been hearing today. The first is a more economic notion where data should be treated as a public good, as non-rivalrous, for instance, and should be made available on that basis, which says something about how data could be treated as an asset and who should have ownership of that asset. Separately, there's a more social interpretation of that, which says that data should be more available to promote social good in the public sphere, which is a much sort of softer interpretation. These imply very different things about how we might want to govern data and who we might want governing our data. Who gets to determine what's good? For instance, if we follow an economistic viewpoint, we should use absolutely everything, which, as the two previous speakers have indicated, might not be the wisest way to go. We need a process for determining where we sit along the spectrum between using everything and using absolutely nothing because there might be risks. So one thing we know is that this spectrum incorporates a shift of power that's been happening over the last 20 years. And it's been happening so gradually that we only see it when moments pop up that really make us conscious. So traditionally, data was a clear feature of the social contract where we gave up our registration details of all kinds to our government and to our city, in the case of continental Europe, in return for functions of citizenship. We got to vote, we got protection by the police, we get to pay taxes and have roads and nice things like that. That was nice. But today, all of these practices are mediated by corporations, either as contractors for government in collecting and using and processing data, or as recipients of data themselves. This means that we need to build a new consensus on how the process of data collection and use relates to the public good. We can't just cite the public good simply as if it meant something. How do we know what kinds of data we want to govern? Now, this is a problem because the law likes individual rights claimants, and data treats us all as parts of groups. So if we look at three different types of data, first of all, there's your data, which is sort of the Geneva Convention, you know, your name, your rank, your serial number, things that you would be expected to give up to the government, to anyone official asking you for your data. Your name, maybe, it's okay to ask if you belong to a political party, your mobile phone number, all of these things might be involved in, for instance, voting in different countries, in existing as a citizen. Then there's data about you, where it gets a little more interesting. Things like your mobile phone metadata, as Andrea was just referring to, your location history of your Fitbit, data from the Internet of Things, which came up earlier today. These are data from which things about you can be inferred, but which are not immediately related to your own identity, your name and your home address, which you have less control over. Finally, there's data about people like you. And this is really where the rubber hits the road for an ethics commission, I think. It's what's been surfacing and going away throughout the day. Data that allows corporations or governments to tell things about you, like how risky you are in various categories that we might be interested in, what your political affiliation might be when you haven't given up data about that, what your consumer preferences are. So out of these three, the type of data we really seem to have traction on right now is the first category. The other two are a bit hazy in terms of governance. That's because they create collective problems. Anyone who's read Work on Group Privacy knows what's coming next, but basically the law addresses individuals, but the data economy tends to address groups in society. That's where the impacts fall. So what's interesting about the data economy is that people are grouped probabilistically. For instance, people with certain combinations of genes that might make them vulnerable to certain conditions in the future, or perhaps their grandchildren vulnerable to certain conditions, which would be more interesting. People who go running in conflict zones. If anyone remembers the nice maps that popped up from Fitbit, from Strava's data from people's Fitbits, that showed military bases in, I think, 6 or 7 different countries, where you could tell who the Westerners were because they went running with Fitbits. And this became open data, and suddenly you got these nice maps of where you could find the Western troops running at given times of the day. So that's probabilistic. And none of it is attached to names, addresses, identifiability. Finally, this is problematic. Why? It's problematic because the data economy, as we are currently building it, is very ready to exploit vulnerability. Just as it's very expensive to be poor, it's also very expensive in terms of data extraction and manipulation. If you read the work of Virginia Eubanks on algorithms in use on the poor through welfare systems, the poor have to give up a lot more data and get a lot less public good back in return than richer people do. And vulnerable groups obviously are also less likely to be able to be private or to push back against invasions of their privacy. So what do we do about this? Well, option one seems to be that we focus on trust and ethics, which essentially amounts to requirements engineering developed through guidelines, toolboxes, and commissions like the one we're all speaking with today. The option that I'm investigating in my research is to take a data justice, what we're terming a data justice or legitimacy perspective, informed by notions of political economy of data, of political legitimacy, and of social justice. So in this view, you acknowledge data is not separate, is never separate from society. And you make data governance part of democratic governance per se, on the higher level. So how might we actually do that? Well, ethics seems to be a problem for regulating markets, as we've clearly run into today. We run into trouble when we try to rely on companies to shape markets through ethical choices. These are the reasons why companies have a duty to shareholders, if they're public companies, to maximize profit. It may be impossible for CEOs to make ethical decisions over profitable ones. They may get fired and replaced by CEOs who will make less ethical decisions. Most everyday choices made around data in government and in the private sector are completely invisible to data subjects, to the rest of us. There's massive political support for innovation in the data economy. We've seen this great tension in the GDPR between encouraging innovation and data traffic versus protecting individuals, and that tension remains in all discussions of data and governance. And it's a very valid tension. And finally, those who are in charge of companies are not representative of society. They tend to be whiter, richer, more educated, from different backgrounds than the average person in society. Second, we can't rely on consumers, which is something else that's come up today, to shape those markets by making ethical choices or even by voting with their feet, because often there is no other reasonable choice. So in the past, consumers have supported slavery, child labor, conflict minerals, climate change, all sorts of things that we find collectively undesirable through their either inability to change their choices of consumption or just the pressure of how much money they have and how much they're able to spend. So this seems an unreliable metric for how we can actually create change. What would legitimate use ideally look like? Well, what do we think the social contract is with regard to data? Can there, for instance, be a social contract with the private sector? We don't have one right now. Do we need to get one, possibly? And if we did, what would it look like? The political philosopher John Dewey said a very long time before big data, but quite accurately for our time, I think, that whenever there's a grouping occurring on the part of a powerful body, and for him this meant a government, there's supposed to be an equal and opposite response from the body politic, because individuals won't know that a policy is acting on them. It's the group that realizes that they're the subject of policy and responds to that. If we apply this to data, this is absolutely not true. Data-driven decision-making is largely invisible. It lands on individuals in ways that they cannot perceive necessarily, and the pushback is often very, very difficult or impossible. Furthermore, what would it mean in a social contract that data travels internationally and gets used in places with very different understandings of what legitimacy is and the public good? This has been raised already today. One metaphor I'm using right now is the idea of data as taxation. What if instead of seeing data as an asset that we are responsible for controlling and shaping, we see it as tax that is exacted from us, and we try to apply the same rules that we would apply to our taxes? For instance, where we have no control over what happens to our individual euros that we pay in tax, but we should aim for democratic control over what happens to tax money per se. Otherwise, we're not living in a democracy. We also expect our tax to support the common good. This is a very basic thing. We also control the use of our taxes through various instruments, which we have also to control data if we use them well. Rule of law, transparency, accountability. But we don't really have ethics committees dedicated to what government should do with tax. It's interesting. We seem to come up with this idea only around data that we should separate out ethics from the normal practice and understanding of the common good. And finally, the main difference here is that public trust, rather than being something that is generated in order to keep the data economy running, is something which, as Hobbes said, should be unreliable and conditional. People should not trust their government implicitly and permanently. It should be an unstable part of the social contract where the government has to demonstrate trustworthiness all the time. And tax is one of the main ways in which we note whether the government is demonstrating trustworthiness to us. We notice if the government is buying tanks and pointing them at our neighbours. And we don't have to be able to track which of our euros paid for which wheel of the tank in order to object against that. I think this is a much better comparison for what is happening with the data we emit on a daily basis than the idea of individual bits and bytes as personal assets that can be traded and restricted and called on in emergencies. So are we capable of applying democratic principles of legitimacy to data? I do not know. If we were going to try and do that, here are the things we might need. We might need processes for truly inclusive decision-making and boundary setting. I look around this room and I see white people with and without glasses. This is the level of diversity. I don't see a lot of input from Germany as a whole. That may not be possible in this particular process, but if we wanted political legitimacy around data use, both in the corporate and the public sector, we would need to find institutions and mechanisms for true inclusiveness, as we have in our democracy. Everybody votes. At least everybody can vote. Also, we would need ways to dynamically negotiate legitimacy between the state and the people under conditions of symmetric power. The symmetric power is one difficulty. Dynamic is a huge difficulty. Rather than landing on guidelines that are static, we would need to have dynamic processes, just like we do in our democracy. Third, we would also need accessible and transparent ways to provide public leverage over decision makers. We have a huge apparatus for this in democracy. We have Parliament and all of the associated bodies. We don't seem to be conceptualizing data within society as meriting the same level of scrutiny. And lastly, we need to have an idea of what this means on the international level. You know, our democracy is also impacted by the decisions of other democracies. And what happens to our data is impacted, as people have discussed very clearly and cogently today, by what other governments and other countries decide to do with data. In my own project, we're working with three basic pillars for trying to work towards an idea of data justice. One is we should control our visibility. We should be able to be selective about to whom we are visible and when we are visible. Second, we should have autonomy in our engagement with technology. So I should be able to adopt things that are beneficial for me, but the government, for instance, should not be able to demand that I pay my taxes digitally, should not be able to demand that I go on Facebook in order to apply for a passport, should not be able to demand engagement with different platforms other than the government itself. And finally, non-discrimination in a more just worldview would be something that is both a top-down and a bottom-up responsibility. So as a data subject, I'm not the only one responsible for determining whether I have been discriminated against, but my government also has a corresponding responsibility to audit data practices in corporations and within the government itself and figure out if I'm likely to be discriminated against. So we need to balance those responsibilities rather than putting them all on the individual. That's what I've got. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Frau Taylor, und vielen Dank für die Möglichkeit, Institutionen zu durchdeklinieren, die den Wert offener Daten in einer demokratischen Gesellschaft heben. Und wir bewegen uns ja in einer Spannungslage. Auf der einen Seite das schöne Zitat, das Sie nannten, Daten nicht zu nutzen, heißt Bücher zu verbrennen. Umgekehrt, Daten übermäßig zu nutzen, heißt die Privatsphäre als Grundlage unserer Gemeinschaftsordnung zu zerstören. Und in dieser Spannungslage kann sich unsere Diskussion auch bewegen. Und es macht Sinn, das bewährte Verfahren einzusetzen, mit dem Namensschild anzukündigen, dass Sie eine Frage haben. Wer möchte den Anfang machen? Herr Niemitz.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ms. Taylor. Very interesting presentation. So have I understood it correctly that you say actually personal data are like money, and that's why we should govern them like we govern our taxes, if I understood you correctly, but maybe I got this wrong. So on the taxes, you say we don't have control sort of dollar by dollar, but we have a collective democratic control over how the budget is spent, and that should be enough for our personal data. That's, of course, something which would mean we would have to change the Charter of Fundamental Rights in the European Union and probably also the European Convention of Human Rights, because it ignores that there's a big difference between money as a commodity and personal data, which expresses our individuality. But maybe I got you completely wrong there.
It's a very helpful misunderstanding. Thank you. So, two things. Of course, data are ourselves. Data are not just assets. They often function as assets, unfortunately. They are also ourselves. We have to balance those two things if we want both an economy and to thrive as human beings. I'm positing that if we take from what I consider to be this slightly wrong-headed view of data as an asset, which we see in, for instance, the Fair Information Practice Principles, which says it's your responsibility to control your data, to make sure they are accurate, to make sure they are fair, to make sure that you can recall them and erase them if they go wrong. These things are not especially realistic in our economy. Around us all the time, our data are being used in ways that we cannot see and cannot control. So I think that we need parallel visions. We need a vision that is based on fundamental rights that says I have the right to do all of these things with my data, data about me. So we keep the idea of personal data as centrally important to rights. But at the same time, we say, given the way that data actually functions in the market, a realist view says that we should also ask questions about legitimacy. And we should ask those questions of corporations as well as governments, and that one potential framing for this, a provocative framing, would be taxation. The idea that we are being taxed all the time, whether we like it or not, and that we can no more control individual data about individual pieces of data about ourselves than we can our individual tax euros. So I use that almost as a reverse case, as a counter case to point out the difficulty of applying only the individual rights framework. Does that make more sense?
I'm not sure, because in the data protection regulation, of course, there is not only the control by the individual, but there is the institutional control by data protection authorities with ex officio powers. And they have received the rules, the democratic rules, according to which and how they can and should control. And this regulation also sets exactly the framework, like taxation law. It sets exactly the framework for the collective use of the personal data. So what's new in your model?
Goes off every time. What's new is scale. I think it's a fairly well-known issue that DPAs do not have the capacity to address every single misuse or possible misuse of data. And that is a massive understatement. I mean, if we had statistics on how much the DPAs would like to do or think they probably should do compared to how much they can do with the resources available, we see a massive disparity. I don't think it's realistic to expect DPAs to control absolutely everything that happens with data, even though I would very much like them to. So I think data protection is necessary, but we need a more pervasive social contract with regard to data that takes in other things than the work of the DPA. We need complementary institutions and processes on the national level, and we need to conceptualize the use of those processes as complementary to data protection. Also, because data protection only aims at personal data, and it is not enough.
Die Diskussionsleidenschaft ist etwas ins Stocken geraten, aber Frau Wender.
So thank you so much for 3 fascinating presentations. Let me start with Peter. You advocated data trust. So I very much, well, in a way you did, as one of several solutions to have more data available. Now, I very much like this, but you changed the slide very quickly. I saw that you had independent printed in bold letters. And indeed, in the Datenethikkommission, this independence issue has played a very important role, because we were wondering, what kind of safeguards do there have to be in place in order to have, really independent data trusts? Because if you give all the data to a data trust, then this may still make things worse for privacy at the end of the day. So this is one question, and let me add one question to Andrea, because I understood you, Peter, as arguing, and there are very good arguments for that, of course, against centralization of data. So decentral storage of data, of course, reduces at least some of the security risks we are facing. And I was wondering, Andrea, can we combine decentralized storage of data with this query and answer model? Or does the query and answer model presuppose that all the data is one place? Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the question. Independence is a big word that can mean many different things. In the data trust model we've explored and published work on, the independence comes from having trustees who have legally binding responsibilities rather than making decisions on behalf of, for the benefit of the data holder. They're bound by those legally binding responsibilities and with penalties if they break it to make decisions aligned with the purpose of the trust. And the trustees, there's guidance in the reports on how to select trustees that provide a representative range of views from across the stakeholders who both collected the data and could be impacted by the use of the data. So that's just one model of independence. There's other models that will be more useful in different contexts, we think.
So yeah, thanks for your question. I think that a decentralized model is definitely compatible with the one of query and answer systems. So you could imagine, for example, 2 companies having 2 query and answer systems separately that store their own data, and analysts can query both systems at the same time. And this, yes?
yes, of course. But my question was, can the data, for example, be stored on the devices, on consumers' devices? Thanks.
And this was the second point. So actually, privacy-enhancing technologies allow for even more decentralization than that. So you could imagine, for example, to have something called federated learning, where actually the data is somehow like the analysis is performed on each device locally, and then the result of this analysis are sent to the company or the institution which is running the analysis. So yes, absolutely the decentralization is made possible by privacy-enhancing technologies.
But if I can add just one extra point on that, so absolutely so you can use federated learning techniques that you can take the answers to the data so the questions to the data. But with the data being on consumers' devices, you have to recognise there the risk that the data on the consumer's device might be about other consumers too. So classic social media data, I've got lots of pictures on my phone. I could take a picture of this room about everybody in this room. So even though it's on the consumer's device, there's still risk on those group issues that Lynette talked about.
Eine Frage an Herrn Wells. Bevor ein politisches Konzept die Umsetzungsebene erreicht, verlangen Ökonomen eine Kosten-Nutzen-Bewertung. Sie wollen gegenübergestellt sehen, was ist der Nutzen, der erzielt wird durch die Bereitstellung von Daten, was sind die Kosten auf der anderen Seite. Und da herrscht in deutschen Behörden jedenfalls ein durchaus skeptisches Verständnis. Dort beobachtet man, dass relativ wenig auf solchen Open-Data-Plattformen abgefragt wird. Die Likes und die Nachfragen sind relativ gering. Deshalb stellt sich die Frage, wie sieht eine Kosten-Nutzen-Bilanz der bisherigen Open-Data-Bewegung aus und kommt der Nutzen, der entsteht, bei denen an, die sozusagen Kostenträger sind? Oder sind es am Ende Konzerne in Silicon Valley, die den Nutzen davon tragen, statt der Bürger, die eigentlich ja ihre Steuern für diesen Aufwand auch getätigt haben?
Okay, so first tackling is that coming through? Yes. So first on the cost-benefit analysis. So one of the first things I did when I went to the Open Data Institute was looking at that question. One of my first realizations was that everybody was wildly optimistic on how fast benefits would be generated. They failed to realize how long it takes to diffuse technology, how long it takes to diffuse the skills required to use that technology to actually realize some of the benefits. So we did some work looking at the macroeconomic studies, which have very large numbers, like macroeconomic studies tend to do. Some of the microeconomic studies looking at particular sectors and some of the case studies of particular examples. We felt we could see enough evidence in the case studies of things like the geospatial data in America is one of the famous ones, London transport data is another, Danish address data is another, in those case studies to show that the figures seen in the macroeconomic studies were possible, but it will take a much longer time scale than most people have been expecting. So we've been telling people, set your expectation, it could be 10 years before you start getting some benefits back. And that can be normal, because often there is a thing as well that we see in the public sector, a stronger demand for a cost-benefit analysis up front than we see in the private sector. The private sector is often willing to gamble more often. Who thought smartphones would be such a game changer over a period of time, or that cloud data centers would change the economics so fast as they did? People had to take a bit of a leap of faith. On the who gets the benefits, so there's two different ways to look at that question on the value chain. So firstly, if you're making better decisions, those benefits accrue to the people making those decisions or the people impacted by their decisions. So if I'm making a faster journey around a city, I benefit. Citizens tend to benefit from that kind of data being released at one level. When you look into the value chain as to who's creating the services and making the revenues and creating the jobs, there you see it varies by context. In some contexts, it will be the large firms, currently in Silicon Valley, soon to be Shenzhen. So you will see those large firms there. You need to look at other measures to make sure that you get some of the value back to, in Germany, the Mittelstand or the SMEs and the startups. So that's through fair taxation of those large multinational firms to make sure some of the value is coming back into your country, looking at support for those startups, looking at skills training to start to rebalance that playing field. It's very natural the large firms will benefit first because they've got the capability to rapidly ingest new forms of data quite fast.
Related learning, we have started a standardization project precisely about this and how this can be done under, by respecting also GDPR. This is a very interesting project. It was brought by us by Chinese companies, interestingly, not by American companies. And it is one of my most interesting projects. So if anyone is interested about how we want to address this, how this can be done in practice, just contact me. The second thing is, so the more we talk here about data, it has something like, let's say, abstract, but in reality, perhaps we should look at how this data is gathered. Why? What we were able to do in our physical offline world gets so complicated, almost impossible in the cyber world. And we have two different identities and realities, offline and online. Offline, we still have some freedom. Online, we are enslaved to the data barons. Why? And there are three ways this happens. One is the data that are gathered through the internet. The second, the data that are gathered through the connectivity, our devices, the 3GPP standards and Wi-Fi standards and so on. And the third is let's say the surveillance mechanism built in the cities and so on, the cameras and so on. At least the internet problem could be solved, at least one. And this is very significant, because this is more than the half of the data that gathered about us. But this cannot be solved by the current internet protocol, in my opinion. And this is the basis of all evil. It creates a very simple connectivity, but brings us to the situation we are. So that means strategically, if people think this is a problem, and I believe it is a problem, then we should try to imagine what could be something that could supersede this structure of the internet and don't have the problem of the internet protocol. And there are people working on this. It is not just a utopia or a dream. And if you want to have information about this, I could also bring you into contact.
Das Vertrauen darin, dass die Menschen auch tatsächlich in die Informationen investieren und dass sie bereit sind, ihre Informationen, ihre Daten zur Verfügung zu stellen, ist ganz entscheidend für ein gelungenes Open-Data-Modell. Und Sie haben deutlich gemacht, wie schwer es ist, dieses Vertrauen herzustellen. Und Sie hatten auf der Folie auch Alternativmodelle, synthetische Daten genannt. Und da blieb mir noch etwas unklar, was genau der Unterschied zu Ihrem Modell ist und was diese Form des Vertrauensgewinnes ausmacht. Und ob es vielleicht auch Methoden gibt, jenseits dessen, würde mich interessieren, etwa Differential Privacy ist ein Modell, das gerne genannt wird, und auch die Blockchain-Technologie als Methode, kontrollieren zu können, was mit meinen eigenen Daten geschieht.
So of course it's fundamental to build trust among the people that they can actually safely share their own data. And yes, so the privacy technologies that, I mean, I didn't mention all of them, but we have, for example, homomorphic encryption, differential privacy, secure multi-party computation, and all these technologies, they try to solve a different privacy problem. But to give an example that I'm familiar with, differential privacy essentially gives a guarantee to everybody who contributes with their data that an analyst will never be able to understand what their data is. And this is a mathematical guarantee of privacy. So I think that differential privacy is a great example of how a privacy-enhancing technology can actually unlock the potential of data while still building trust among the individuals. I want to be clear on one aspect, though. Usually, privacy comes at a cost. And I do not mean only money. I mean, for sure, like building privacy enhancing technologies like requires investments, but that's not only what I mean. So usually, in order to achieve some notion of privacy in data analysis, one needs to find a good trade-off between the privacy level of the analysis and the utility of the analysis. So if we want to inject privacy and enforce privacy in our data analysis model, then we must accept that the utility of the data we use might decrease. Thankfully, there are ways to optimize this trade-off, and in particular, the more, usually as a rule of thumb, the more data we have, the better the privacy utility trade-off becomes. So if we collect more data, in the end, also the utility becomes better without compromising on privacy.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. Just an addendum to what Andrea said. I think that privacy-enhancing technologies are the starting point. They're a basic necessity for the data economy. Beyond that, though, we see the problem that, the example of Cambridge Analytica, where thanks to the data that was downloaded from Facebook illegitimately, the company was able to create an audience of 30 million of the US electorate in order to try and swing the election. What's less publicized is that they also got the entire electorate as a lookalike audience, because with those 30 million people, they could get the other 70 million, basically. And so this wasn't actually data of individuals that they were accessing. This was probabilistic inference about other audiences that would behave the same way as the people whose data they actually had. So we protect the people whose data it is when we use privacy-enhancing technologies. But there's a further political layer of the problem about who gets to use data and how, which requires different institutional engagement. And I think it's really important to balance those two when we think about pets.
Wir können jetzt in einer Schlussrunde gleichsam einen Blick in die digitale Glaskugel werfen und wir könnten alle drei noch eine kurze Aussicht in diese Glaskugel uns geben und uns vielleicht auch Empfehlungen mitgeben, welche Empfehlungen haben Sie für die Datenethikkommission? Wie sollte man Open Data in Zukunft ausgestalten? Wie sollte die PSI-Richtlinie entwickelt werden, die ja Open by Design und Open by Default zum Standardmodell erheben will? Und wie könnten wir auf diese Herausforderungen reagieren?
Yes, I mean, to summarize, I think that sharing data is absolutely fundamental for our society, and it is a moral imperative to actually enable that. I think that, unfortunately, the traditional anonymization model is not a reliable solution for that, and it is not a future-proof technique. So this means that probably the way forward is to invest in privacy-enhancing technologies, of course realizing that privacy does not come for free, and therefore we must adapt our expectations to that.
So I suppose first just on recommendations for the Data Ethics Commission. For me, it would go back to some of the comments I've heard earlier of not only focusing on ethics, it's what's the regulation, the legislative environment, and what are the other forms of government interventions that create the type of data economy, the type of data society that you want to see in Germany. Now, there's a wide range of government interventions, from funding certain forms of services to be created, from funding the development of new technologies and the uptake of the skills to use those technologies, to new governance models and new regulation models for intervention. So we're looking at that range of things rather than solely ethics. In terms of the PSI directive, is always a very important one of those. Some of the new powers in there about being able to compel certain data assets which are in the private sector to be able to moving it towards open on our data spectrum, whether or not fully open, but moving it towards open. Doing that on a pan-European level is a very good way of creating a basic infrastructure which can scale and can provide some scale across Europe, both across Germany and then across Europe. Just in terms of predicting the future, so I suppose the thing I always end on here is that when I look at the data economy, I get scared. You know, I hear all the horrible stories. I see them all the time. It terrifies me. What I do is I choose to be optimistic at that time. You know, it's better to choose that we can get. It's better to choose to be optimistic, to believe it's possible to build a better world, because we're more likely to do that if we're optimistic enough. If we choose to be optimistic and make that choice, that we can do that. It's going to take time, but it is possible to dig ourselves out of the hole that the markets have put us into.
So to build on both of those responses, I think that this is going to be a very long-term process of finding ways to get leverage over markets and over the public sector's use of data. It's a political process ultimately, and the ethics debate is one piece of that, but hopefully only one relatively small component in a larger, much longer-term generational move to figure out how to get traction on the data that we emit. I would compare it more to the struggle against climate change or to the struggle for women's rights, in that it has already taken generations, it will take generations more, and it needs to be framed as a broader, you know, as Paul correctly put it, as a broader struggle about fundamental rights and a conversation about fundamental rights. And when that happens over time, we will find that we are all discussing the same thing. In the ethics conversation, in the pets conversation, you know, in the open data conversation, hopefully we will see convergence, and that's when we will see actual leverage and traction that is meaningful.
Vielen Dank für Ihre instruktiven Diskussionsbeiträge. Es fällt schwer, Diskussionen zusammenzufassen, und diese Aufgabe hat sich dankenswerterweise Frau Wopen angenommen.